Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to Critical Weight Theory, the podcast where, in addition to sometimes looking at movies and TV shows and music and such, we sometimes unravel the complexities between the lines and behind misinformation and disinformation and beliefs and political strategy in our most modern of worlds. So today we're diving into one of the most perplexing questions about former President Donald Trump and current President Donald Trump. Does he believe his own lies? So this question has fascinated psychologists, political analysts, and the general public alike. Trump's ability to repeat falsehoods, often with unwavering confidence, raises important questions about the intersection of self deception, strategic dishonesty, and human psychology. So let's explore. How exciting, huh? So let's talk about the scale of falsehoods. To start, let's establish some context. Throughout Trump's political career, he's made an astonishing number of false or misleading statements. I've said in the past that it almost seems like he was designed to make other politicians look more honest, and I still stand by that statement. In fact, I have more reason than ever to stand behind that statement. So, the Washington Post documented over 30,000 such false claims during his first term alone, and well, there's going to be probably more than 30,000 more because you know what? There's even less to hold him back this time than there was the previous time. So from exaggerations to outright fabrications, and let's just say some half truths. A lot of half truths or quarter truths or something like that. These statements he's made range from small inaccuracies to grandiose claims, like his persistent insistence that the 2020 election was quote unquote rigged, or for a variation, he would say his campaign would need to be too big to rig. And an example I always give is that he would often say that there were ballots showing up in rivers, yet he would never name which rivers or which towns they belonged to or even which state those rivers were located where all of the ballots were allegedly found. You know, it's almost like he was just lying. And, you know, a lot of people out there, they still believe it. So these assertions have been widely discredited, yet Trump continues to repeat them, and his supporters still continue believing them. Why? Well, there are two main schools of thought. There's the illusory truth effect. This is one theory that revolves around, the psychological phenomenon where repetition makes people more likely to believe statements, even if they're false, sometimes even if they're ridiculously false. Because, as I've explained before, if you're constantly having to grapple with certain claims, you are repeating those claims, and there's a little seed of doubt that kind of gets planted. Like even if you're debunking the claims, like if the evidence is on your side, you're still grappling with that idea, and it kind of potentially leads you down the path of, well, maybe this idea is actually true, maybe there's something to it, it's sure popular, a lot of people are talking about it, maybe there's actually something to it. And the claim starts to seem a little different than how it looked when it first was out there, right? It sort of transforms. It's a bit like a magic trick. So some analysts argue that the frequent repetition of debunked claims indicates he might believe those claims himself. By saying something often enough, even the speaker can begin to internalize it as true. This could explain why Trump and others continue to push narratives like the election being stolen, or, what are some other ridiculous claims like that they're doing surgeries to make kids trans in schools and stuff like that. That's not happening anywhere. But see, the fact that I mentioned that, it kind of further, for lack of a better word, just fucks things up, because you just can't escape the idea, and the idea becomes almost like a cultural force in its own way. So unfortunately, even by talking about certain things, you're kind of contributing to the climate in which those, you know, talking points will dominate. You're helping to shift things in that direction. And unfortunately, you know, in a way that's hard to avoid. So really, one of the ways to avoid doing that is to change the subject, you know, as often as possible, because those types of issues and talking points are themselves distractions. So if you just shift the topic somewhere else, shut that talking point down more often, it will be a little bit less frequently bandied about as if it's something that's true or that could be true, which is, of course, right next door to the truth, isn't it? So that's really the best strategy for dealing with that. And yeah, you don't have to talk about the overwhelming evidence to the contrary if you have changed the subject. You're no longer discussing that particular view, so you actually gain a little bit of an advantage. So really, it is about as simple as that. But you know, it's it's a trick that's hard to really get going. You know what I mean? It's like it's something that almost has to snowball in its own right. It has to kind of catch on. People spend so much time talking about the narratives promoted by Trump and others that they forget that, oh wait, we could have our own talking points and narratives that we try to shift through. We're always sort of on the defense, you know what I'm saying? And that's not the best place to be. But I guess the question here is it self-deception or something more calculated? Well, based on what I've just said, you can tell that I think it's at least a little bit calculated. It's strategic dishonesty and seeding the conversation or the argument with ideas that really have no place in a conversation, but they're intended as distractions. So others suggest that Trump's falsehoods and whatnot are deliberate, a tool to shape narratives and mobilize his base. Now, I'm basically in that camp. I think there is a high degree of, you know, deliberate planning in this. Not so much every aspect of it, but definitely, as sort of a routine to mobilize people. It's an approach that has been referred to as seeding, which is like planting doubt or belief in the minds of supporters, even if the claims lack factual grounding. The mere fact that they're mentioned over and over again is really sufficient for them to spread sort of like a wildfire. And I guess this might be an awkward timing to use wildfire as a metaphor because of what's happening in California, but really it is of a similar effect. It can be about as destructive in many ways. So, as they say, there's Voltaire's famous observation: anyone who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. So, by pushing narratives that resonate emotionally, like the idea of a rigged election or, nefarious doctors kidnapping kids to, you know, commit surgeries against them, while Trump may be less concerned with truth and more focused on maintaining loyalty and control. So, interestingly enough, there are some psychological insights from Mary Trump. So, for a deeper perspective, you can look to what Mary Trump has said. She's the former president's niece and a clinical psychologist. Well, now he's not a former president. See, I'm tempted to keep calling him that, but I guess I have to break that habit now. But anyway, in her book, she described the dynamics of their family as malignantly dysfunctional, and he's taken that energy really to the country as a whole. She believes Trump's behavior reflects deep seated psychological problems. So, in an interview, Mary discussed the possibility that Trump genuinely believes some of his lies. She referred to this as, a blend of self deception and a need to maintain a particular image at all costs. Her analysis highlights how personal history and psychology uh, meet together with political strategy, creating a leader who both believes and benefits from his own narratives. So, the conclusion here is pretty complex. Does Trump believe his own lies? The answer is complicated. Evidence points to a combination of self deception and strategic dishonesty. His behavior aligns with patterns observed in individuals who use deception as a tool for personal or political gain, whether by accident or design. Trump's falsehoods have undeniably shaped public discourse and influenced millions. It's similar to another point I've raised before that Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator, was probably actually an atheist, but he strategically, at least pretended to be a religious person. What do you know? Who else does that? Most certainly. Gee, I wonder. I wonder who I could be talking about here. But as we reflect on this, it's worth considering the antidote to such deception, which again is sometimes changing the subject when you can, and critical thinking, media literacy, and the courage to challenge absurdities before they can take root. So that's it for this particular episode of Critical Weight Theory. If you found my talking points insightful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who loves a good deep dive into human behavior and folly. And, the subscription stuff is actually probably most important for YouTube, for their algorithm. And, I'm your host, Wade, and I'll see you next time whenever I put out another episode. So stay curious, stay critical, and always question the narrative.